Now, what does get started mean? Now, obviously, we got all our routes here on the backend to which we can send requests. And just as we started in the MongoDB sections with implementing the create methods first so that we can work with places, for example, I now also want to start implementing the connection for creating something, specifically for creating a user. Why do I want to do that? Well, because on the backend, in the end, we need a user document, so to say, to then also connect it to our place, because we have this connection set up there, and we have all the code for establishing this connection, for example, in the places controller in the create place function. There, when we do create a new place, we connect the place to a creator, which we get here from our incoming request. Later, we'll change this a little bit, and which we then, of course, also look up in the database so that we really only continue if we do find a user for that provided ID. So because we have that user place connection, it makes sense to start with creating users because we need users to create places, kind of. Therefore, on the front end, of course, it's the auth page I want to start on, because there we have our auth submit handler, which in the end fires whenever we, authenticate. So whenever we log in or sign up. Now we'll have to tweak that logic here a little bit because I actually want to do different things depending on whether we are logging in or signing up. If we are logging in, after all, I don't want to create a new user. If we are signing up, though, I do want to create a new user. In both scenarios, however, I want to send a HTTP request. In one case, I just want to send a HTTP request to the login route, and in the other case, I want to send a HTTP request to the sign up route. That's the idea here. So therefore, let's go back to the front end here, to the auth page, and let's make sure that here we don't just log in as we're currently doing it, but that instead we do send a HTTP request. For this, I will first of all convert this function here in an async function with the async keyword so that I can use async await. This is not a must do. The alternative is to use promises with then and catch, but I prefer the async await syntax here. Now, why do I need it at all? Because we will work with a promise. Because now instead of console logging any inputs, I want to send a HTTP request. And we can do that with the fetch API, which is provided by browsers in modern JavaScript. As an alternative, you could also use Axios or other third-party libraries that make sending HTTP requests simple, but here I will use this built-in API. And now this fetch function here needs a string that points at our backend. So here, I in the end want to point at /signup, or to be precise at /API users /signup. And of course, all of that prepended with our backend host. Now, if I start my backend server here again with npm start, and of course, you find a snapshot of this latest backend state attached to this lecture. You'll just need to switch your database credentials if you're using my snapshot and use yours instead. Then, if you run npm install, you should be able to run npm start thereafter and bring up that backend server. And keep in mind that this runs on port 5000 on localhost. So here we want to send a request to HTTP localhost 5000 /API /users /signup or /login, depending on what we want to do. But we first of all need to create at least one user before we can test signing up, I guess. So let's start with this. Now, this sign up request here, if we have a look at our backend routes, should be a post request. So to configure this to be a post request, we need to pass in a second argument to fetch. And there we can configure this request. For example, we can set the method property to post, and now a post request will be sent. Now, this alone is not enough, though. We also need to set certain headers. So we'll add the headers key here and set this to an object so that we can add key value pairs here, which will represent the headers that are attached to the outgoing request. And there I want to set my content type to application JSON. Without that, our backend will not know which kind of data it receives, and our body parsing in app.js where we parse incoming JSON data here, will not kick in correctly because it doesn't know it's getting JSON data. So let's set these headers, and of course we need to attach some data. So I want to set a body on this request, and this, and that's now important, always has to be in JSON format. Now conveniently in the browser we have this JSON object where we can call the stringify method, and this takes regular JavaScript data like an array or like an object, and it will convert it to JSON. And here in the end, I of course want to submit my form data. I want to add or send an object which needs to have a name key, an email key, and a password key. Why do I need to send these keys? Well, because that is what I'm expecting on the backend. If we have a look at the user's routes, we see we are validating for a name, an email, and a password. And in the user's controller, when we create a new user here in the signup function, we do extract name, email, and password. So we need to provide these 3 pieces of information here. Hence here, I will add these 3 pieces, and as a name, I will point at form state dot inputs dot name dot value. Remember, we're having that form state here, which is coming from the use form hook, which manages our different data pieces. When we switch to sign up mode, we add a name field. If we're in login mode, we only have an email and password field. So now this is managed for us by the form hook, and therefore we can extract it here. And of course, extracting just the name is not enough. We also want to extract the email value, and we want to extract the password value. And these values should be valid when we reach the auth submit handler, because we only make this button here, the submit button, clickable if we have a valid form here, thanks to this check. Now, one thing is still not correct though. We don't always want to sign up when we reach this function. This function also gets triggered if we are in login mode. So actually here we should check if is login mode is true. And if it is true, we want to do something else. If it's not true, so if we're in sign up mode, then I want to send this request. With this adjustment, we're now making sure we only send a request to the sign up backend or to the sign up URL if we are in sign up mode. Now, fetch, of course, returns a promise. So since I'm using async here we can add a wait to wait for the response we get back. Now, this actually could also fail. So let's actually wrap this with try catch. So I'll grab all this code here and add it here into try and catch any errors we might be getting. And we'll have to do some error handling here later. For the moment, I will just console log the error. Now, one important word, this will not fail if our backend sends back an error status code, so a 400 or 500 status code. I'll come back to how we handled those a little bit later. For now, let's just wrap it like this and care about error handling later. So we got the response, and when using the fetch API, so this fetch function, the response itself has generally all the response data, but it does not yet have the parsed response body. Instead, we do parse the response body by calling response.json if it's in JSON format, which it is in our API's case, and which is in case of most APIs. This returns a new promise, so we should await this as well, and this will then be our response data, if you want to call it like this. So this will be the actual data in the response body. And if we have a look at our backend, we see what's inside the response is our created user in the end. So we got this back, we got this response data, which should be our created user data. Now for the moment, why don't we just console log this here before we then have a look at what else we could do? One important word about auth login, this should only kick in once all these steps are done, because here we are always awaiting, which means that in the end, this here is in a new then block, so to say, after all these steps completed, even though it's outside of try catch. This will only run, this auth login code will only run once we're done getting the response, parsing the response, and so on. So the order should be correct. With that, if we npm start our frontend here as well to bring up that frontend server, we should be able to send a sign up request. So let's see whether that works. Here is our front-end application. And for the moment, let's click on Authenticate, switch to Sign Up, and test this. Here I entered max, test@test.com, and then some password and click Sign Up. And what we see now is actually that we get an error. And this is actually an expected error. Now, what's the problem here? Let's have a look at that in the next lecture.